Hi, and welcome to the second session of Learning Java, offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. If you remember from last session, we left off with the ways to display output, and I think the last way was using console.log. And if you look off to the left of my screen, you can see the console.log that we used inside the program. So I want to move on to briefly talking about assignments. So let's see if we have, if I have, I can get rid of console.log. And I'll do a file save as. And I will go into my JavaScript class, and I'll change the save as type from text to all files. And I'll call this assignment.html. Hit enter, and with assignments, last session we briefly covered how to create a variable in JavaScript. So in between the script tags, I will use the keyword var, and I'll create a variable. I create a variable named x, and I will give it a value of 10. And you end the JavaScript statement with a semicolon. So now I've created a variable named s, and I've given it a value of 10. So say I wanted to add 5 to that, to the value of x. All you have to do is type in x. We've already defined the variable named x. And if I wanted to add 5 to it, you do the plus sign equal sign 5 and semicolon. And then if we wanted to display that, I'll use an alert this time. And I will display the X in a pop-up window, pop-up alert box. So if I do a file, and I'll do a save, and then you go to the lower left-hand corner on Start, and you right-click, and click on File Explorer. And what we'll do is open up that file. I just have to find it, so it's in my C drive. And I'll go into JavaScript. And I call this file assignment.html. So if I double click, it'll open it up in the web browser. And it opened up the web browser, and you can see the alert box says, this page says, and it's 15. Remember, the initial value of x was only was 10, and we added 5 to it, so it displays 15. Because now the value of x is 15. A web page. All right, so let's shrink this down. Right. Just have to minimize my browser session. There we go. I'll make this a little bit smaller. I'll get rid of File Explorer. All right, so now we have Notepad on the left side, where we're developing our programs, and on the right side, we have our web browser session. So by using the alert, I was able to display what the value of the variable s was. Now, if I wanted to do any other mathematical operations, or if I wanted to do subtraction or division or multiplication, you can simply use, so we have s defined, and what you can do is you can simply use, say we want to subtract 9 from it. So I would do minus equals 9. And so now the value of x should be 1. I should display that as 1. So I'll do a file, save, and off to the right in my web browser session, all I have to do now is do a refresh. And it refreshes the page. And it says this, my alert box says this page says 1. So it gives a value of 1. And click OK, and then it displays the H1 tag, which says a web page. All right, so that's how you can assign values using the equal sign. And then if you want to do math with by adding, subtracting, multiplication, division, you can just use whatever mathematical operator you want to use, and then the equal sign, and then numbers that you want to subtract or add to it. All right, so that's a brief overview of assignment. Now let's see. Next, I want to talk about data types in JavaScript. So I will do a file, save as, and I'll do all files. And now I will call this data type HTML. So now I have a new file. And JavaScript variables can hold many data types, such as numbers, strings, objects, and more. Let me just show you some examples. So say I have a variable named length. Instead of x, and I will give it 16. Okay, so that's an example of a number. Okay, and get rid of this. Now I use the keyword var to create a variable, and say I wanted last name equals, and then I'll use single quotes or double quotes. Actually, in JavaScript, I like to use single quotes. I've got Smith for the last name. Semicolon. Make this a little bit bigger. And lastly, I'll show you what an object might look like. So var, and I'll call this obj. So I'll give the variable name obj equals, and then in curly brackets, say I wanted first name. I'll use camel case for the first name. Colon, and then a first name. John, comma. And let's make this bigger. And then last name, colon, Hill. And then curly brackets to close it out, and then end it with a semicolon. So now that is an object. first name of John, last name of Hill. All right, so by giving it data, you're typecasting the variable. All right, so the first variable is length, and it's going to have a variable. It's going to have the data type of integer, because 16 is a whole number, and then the variable named last name is going to have a data type of string, and then the variable named obj is going to have the type of an object. Now we can display. Excuse me. We can display all these using the alert. I will just name the data set with a comma and last name. Last name, comma, obj. And when I do a file save and run it, let's see how it turns out. C and JavaScript, and I will run the file datatype.html. Nothing happened. Let's see. Why don't we try one at a time? Why don't we try just running the obj variable? Data type, I'll refresh it, and now it works. And it says this page says object, so it doesn't display the whole object out. What if we try last name? Last name. And I'll do the file save. And I will refresh the page, and this page says Smith. Okay, so it displays it out. So these are the different data types you can work with when you're running JavaScript. I mean. Now, if you were going to add a number to a string, it will treat the number as part of. It will treat the number. It will convert the number into a string, and it'll display it that way. So, why don't I comment out these other variables, and I will add a new one. So say I have a variable, I'll name it z equals, and I'll have the string named Ford, single quote, and I'm going to add that to a number 15. Semicolon and finish it out. Now, when I go to display alert, the variable z, I'll show you what JavaScript winds up doing with it. So I just have to do a save, and I just have to refresh the page. I can get to it. Okay. It says forward 15. So that forward and the number 15 are all considered a string. That's how it gets displayed. And that's how it's stored in the variable z. So it doesn't blow up when you're adding a string to a number. It just converts the number into the string. All right. Okay, let's move on to functions within JavaScript. So I will do a file, save as, and I'll change my type to all files, and I will call this function.html. And now JavaScript function is simply a block of code designed to perform a particular task. The JavaScript function is executed when something evokes it or calls it, just like in any other language. When you have a function, you define a function, and then when you call the function, you pass it arguments, and what's inside the function gets executed. So the format in JavaScript to create a function, I'll get rid of all the variable stuff. All right. So the format is the keyword function, space, and then we can say my function. We give it a name, and then we'll do a parenthesis, and then you can pass variables. If there are no variables to pass inside the function, then it's just parentheses, empty parentheses. But in this case, we're going to pass two parameters. Okay. And then you do a curly bracket, hit enter a couple times. Then under the F in the word function, I like to put I like to line up the closing curly brackets. And then inside the function, you have to indent the different commands that you want to do inside the function. That's a little too much of a tab, so I'm just going to do like 3 spaces. So I'll do a return of the parameter P1 times the parameter P2, semicolon. And then I'm going to do a little comment. And I'll say the function returns the product of P1 and P2. All right, so that's my little note. And now we have a function all defined, but we have to call the function for it to be executed. And the way to do that is down below. You can see I have a paragraph tag up here, looking in my notepad section. So we have a paragraph tag, and inside the opening P tag, I've given it an ID of demo. And what I want to do is I want to call that ID. So I'll close out the so inside the script tag, I will do a document .get element by ID, parentheses, and I better extend my notepad session. So move it over there, and so inside parentheses, I am going to name the ID, and in this case, the ID's name is demo. parentheses, dot inner HTML equals my function. So I'm calling the function name. That's the call to the function named my function. And then parentheses, I'm going to pass two values or arguments. And the values I'm going to pass are 4, comma, and 6. Parentheses, and end the whole statement with a whole statement with a semicolon. All right. So let me explain some of the things that are going on here. So in our HTML page, we've included some JavaScript. And the JavaScript is in between the script and the closing script tags. And what we've done, I'll add a space here. We've created a function named my function by using the keyword function and then giving the function a name, and then you have parentheses. And if you have parameters, then you add the parameters, you separate them. If you have more than one parameter, you separate them by commas. And you end it with a closing parenthesis. And then you start with a curly bracket. And then you indent inside the function or any commands that you want to have executed when the function is called. In this case, we're using the return command, and we're going to return whatever the value of the parameter P1 is times the value of the parameter P2. So whatever the product is. And then I end it with a semicolon, and then I've just added with 2 forward slashes. That's the symbol we use for a single line comment in JavaScript. So I added 2 forward slashes to add a comment. This function returns the product of P1 and P2. And then you close out your function with a closing curly bracket. And that's how you define a function and give your function different commands for it to execute when it's called. And down below, we've got the command document dot, and then we're calling the method get element by ID. So the element we're trying to get by calling the ID of demo is up here inside the paragraph tag. All right, so this opening paragraph tag has ID equals demo, and then it's got a closing paragraph tag. So there's no content in there. So when I do a call of get element by ID, I call the ID demo. Then I do a dot inner HTML. So I'm going to display it in my HTML. And that is going to equal the call of my function. So when you call the function, you name it, right? So you have to name it first so it knows where to go. And I'm passing 2 arguments. I'm passing 2 values. One is 4 and one is 6. So when I call my function with the value of 4 and 6 being passed, it comes up to where the function was declared, and it will pass the value of 4 into the parameter P1, and it'll pass the value of 6 into the parameter P2. And then it will return whatever P1 times P2 is. So in this case, P1 is going to have a value of 4, and P2 will have a value of 6. So 4 times 6 will be 24 that gets returned. And when it says return, it will return it to this statement right here. And because I'm doing a dot inner HTML, it will display it in my HTML inside this p tag. So our web page will say, it'll have a heading, an h1 tag with a heading of a web page. And then it will display in the p tag, it will just display the number 24. So let's give it a try. I'll do a file and save. And this one is called function.html. So I'm going to shrink down my notepad and I will right click on the lower left hand corner and select File Explorer. And I will go to where my file is, which is in my JavaScript folder. And I will double click on function.html, and that will open it up in a web page. And to the web page, but it did not display. So I realized my mistake. So if you look at the keyword inner HTML, I spelled it lowercase inner HTML, and it's lowercase inner, but then it's uppercase HTML. So now if I give it a try, if I do a file save, and I go to my browser session, refresh it, I get the h1 tag or web page, and then the p tag is going to display 6 times 4, which is 24. Now, if I were to change the argument values when I call my function, my function, say I did 10, comma, and I'll do 25. I'll do a file save, and then I'll do a refresh of my web browser page, and 10 times 25 is 250. So that is how you create and call a JavaScript function. So you can see the syntax that is used. Along with, in this case, inside the function, I use the return command to return a value back to where the function was called. So functions are extremely handy blocks of code that you can use over and over again. You can use them between different programs. You can use them throughout a single program, and they're just amazingly helpful. So let's show you how to actually do a real world example. All right. So living in the U.S., say we had we wanted to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. All right. So I'm gonna do a save as and name this file something else. So I go into my JavaScript folder, change the file type to all files, and I'm going to call this function. I'll call this Celsius bearing. It's kind of a long file name, but very descriptive. So in this case, we want to create a function, and we'll call it 2 Celsius. Or I want to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. right? Well, let's do Celsius to Fahrenheit, or Fahrenheit to Celsius. All right, so we will name our function to Celsius. So I'll call it 2 Celsius. And we're going to pass one parameter. I'm going to call it F1. Or I'll call it, let's say, I'll call it so I'll call it F. Don't need a 1 there. And that'll be our value for in Fahrenheit degrees. So let's see. Why don't we do why don't we change our heading? We'll call this JavaScript Functions. And we'll add another paragraph. So let me describe what this is. So this is an example of a JavaScript function that converts from Fahrenheit to Celsius. And then I will do the closing p tag. All right, so that's our paragraph. And then where that conversion is doing the job. So the second paragraph tag is going to hold whatever the conversion value is when we call our function, just like we did in the previous example. And then down in between the script tags, we're going to add our JavaScript. So we're going to create. I'm going to get rid of this so I can retype it over again. All right, so I'll have function, and then we have the keyword function, and then we're going to call this function to Celsius. And then we'll have a parenthesis. We'll do parenthesis, and we're going to pass a parameter named f. And then we'll do a closing parenthesis, and then we will do a curly bracket. Hit enter a couple times, and then right under the F in the word function, I'll do a closing curly bracket. And inside the function, we're going to have to do our conversion. Now, whatever goes inside the function, remember you have to indent it. Okay. So what we're going to do is we'll do the command return. And then we will do parenthesis 5//9 parenthesis times, which is the asterisk, space, parenthesis, and then we'll take the value of the parameter named f minus 32 minus 32. And close out the parenthesis, and then give it a semicolon. And that is our function. Now, an additional JavaScript command is document, right? It's the HTML document. dot, and then call the method get element by ID, parentheses, and now we have to name our ID, right? So in this case, the name of the ID is demo dot inner capitalized HTML equals, and here's where we're going to call our function and pass it a value. Right? We only have our function is only defined with one parameter, so we only have to pass it one value or argument. So we call our function by naming it. So we call it by name. So 2 Celsius is the name of it, and then in parentheses, what do we want to convert? So say it's 80 degrees outside on a nice summer day, and close it with a parenthesis and a semicolon. And so we want to convert 80 degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius. And what that conversion is will be displayed using inner HTML. It will be displayed up here in this paragraph tag, where the ID equals demo. So right in between these two tags. Let's give it a try. So if I do a file save, and then this is a new file, so I have to go into File Explorer, and I have to go into my JavaScript folder, and oh, unfortunately, when I saved the file, I didn't save it as a HTML file. So what I'll do is I'll do a file, save as, and I have to remember to, in Notepad, you have to remember to change the save as type from text documents.txt to all files. So now, it should be okay. And I will save it. And now I can go into Explorer, if I can find it. There it is. I'll double click on the file Celsius Fahrenheit function.html and JavaScript functions. This is an example of a JavaScript function that converts from Fahrenheit to Celsius, but it's not displaying the conversion. So there is a problem. Let's see if we can find it. This is a huge part of programming, is being able to problem solve and see where your typos are, see where you're not using the correct commands. So we know our H1 tag is displaying fine, and we know that our paragraph tag is displaying fine, but this second paragraph tag that has an ID equal to demo is not displaying correctly. So what is the problem? That's it. So I've got in between my script, oh, maybe that's the problem. I've got an opening script tag where I'm inside of it, I'm placing all my JavaScript, but I don't know what happened to my closing script tag. All I've got is this at the end of the closing body tag, I've got a single float, so I'll get rid of that, and then let's see. I need a closing script tag. Let's see, PT. I'll close it up, and let's hope that is the problem. I'll do a file save, and then I'll come over here to my web browser session. I'll just do a refresh, and boom, I got this humongous float number, a float type. It's a float type because it's got a decimal place. So if I rounded that up, it would be 27 degrees Celsius. 80 degrees Fahrenheit is 27 degrees Celsius. So that is our or to Celsius function. And we're able to convert, using that function, we're able to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So just a real world example of how you can use functions. They're really amazing, so you want to get a good handle on how to use them. All right, so. And that's it. Well, let's move on to events, JavaScript events. Now that we've talked about functions. So I will do a file, save as, and I will do a brand new file called events.html, events.html. Now, HTML events are things that happen to HTML elements. Remember, elements, like in our program here, elements are headings, paragraphs, and things can happen to those different HTML elements. When JavaScript is used in HTML pages, JavaScript can react on these events. An HTML event can be something the browser does or something a user does. Here are some examples of HTML events. An HTML web page has finished loading. An HTML input field was changed. An HTML button was clicked. Often when events happen, you may want to do something. JavaScript lets you execute code when events are detected. HTML allows event handler attributes with JavaScript code to be added to the HTML elements. So what we would have is, I'll change this heading to, instead of JavaScript functions, it'll be JavaScript events. And the format of a JavaScript event is, and what I'll do is I'll use a JavaScript comment. So actually, that's not going to work because it has to be down in the script tag. But so I need to use the HTML comment. So the format is going to be whatever element, HTML element you're working with. Inside the opening HTML tag. So you got the HTML element, and then you've got an event that happens, like a click or a mouse over, or a whole bunch of other events. So it would be the event equals, and then some JavaScript code. So when the event happens, the JavaScript code will be executed. So that's, and let me finish out my HTML comment. All right. So let's do a real world example. And we're going to do an on click. So we're going to take a button tag. Get rid of this guy. We don't need that paragraph tag. And let's see. And we don't need this JavaScript down here with the script tags. Because we're going to be putting the JavaScript directly inside the element. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an element called a button. So a button element would look something like this. And I'll do a closing button element, HTML element. And now inside the opening HTML element that is, in this example, is button, I'm going to do an event. So the event is onClick, all lowercase, equals. Now if you look above in the comment, we have an element. In this case, the element is button. And then we have an event, onClick, and then we have equals. And then we're going to have some JavaScript. So we do double quotes. Oops. Double quote. So double quotes, and we'll call document dot get element by ID parentheses. Oops. Parentheses. And then we're going to call the ID is going to be demo, which is in this paragraph tag down here. Down here. Double quotes. And then I'll close it up with parentheses, dot, inner, capital HTML, right? And then I'm gonna bring it down below. And then it's gonna be equals. And I'll use the date function and pass it no arguments. And then close it out with a double quote. And then inside the button will be labeled the time is question mark. And then I'll do the closing button tag. So I'm going to bring that up right here. Okay. So if you look at the comment I have up here, you know, the basic format. When you're using an element to execute JavaScript code, in this case, the element is button. The event is onClick equals, and then surrounding double quotes, we have our JavaScript code, which is document.get element by ID, parentheses, and then you name the ID in double quotes, which is demo in this case, and parentheses, dot, inner HTML equals, and then we're calling the date function with, I'm passing it no arguments, so it's parentheses, and then you finish by surrounding everything with another double quote, an ending double quote, and then the greater than sign, which ends the button elements tag. Then we want to put verbiage inside the button, which in this case is the time is question mark, and then you do an ending button tag. So that's how you react to an event that is inside a HTML element, and you execute JavaScript code. So let's give it a try. So I do file, I'll do save, and then I have to open up this file in a web browser. So I go to File Explorer. And let's see. I'm going to click on my JavaScript folder, and the name of my file is events.html. I double click it, and you can see off to the right in my web browser session, I've got a heading JavaScript events, right? And then I've got a button. And inside the button, I put the verbiage, the time is question mark. Now, if I click on click of the button, it's going to display the time, or the date, I'm sorry. It says what time? The date time. So there is a problem. What time is it? So if you click, it should say date, parentheses. Let's say, so once again, we have to figure out what the problem is. So I've got my button, element, space, and then the on click. That's all spelled correctly. And I've got an equal sign. And then double quote, document dot get element by ID, parentheses, demo's down here, and parentheses dot inner HTML equals date, parentheses, time is, and then it's closing button tag, add all this in. And it's supposed to tag out here. And it should have the date and the time on click equals and refresh it. And nothing happens. And I think I figured it out. So if you look at the event is on click equals, and then I have to surround all my JavaScript code with double quotes. So I've got a double quote here to start it with. Then I've got the JavaScript command document.getElement by ID, parenthesis, and then when I'm naming my ID of demo, I use double quotes to surround demo. But the problem is when I use the first double quote, that ends this string that's supposed to be surrounded by double quotes. So here's the first double quote, and then this becomes the last double quote. So instead of using double quotes around the ID, I need to use single quotes. And then that way it doesn't interfere with the double quotes that's going to end the JavaScript string down here after date. So I'm pretty sure that's what the problem was. So file, save, and I'll go back to my browser session, and I'll be able to do a refresh. I'm going to close out these other sessions. Close you down, I'll close you down. All right, so I'm going to do a refresh. So now I'm refreshed. Does my heading, JavaScript events, and I've got my button. And when I click on my button, I get Monday, August 3rd, 2020 with the time and the time zone. And it's at military time of 1735, which is the time I'm doing this recording right now, which is what, 8:36 at night. So pretty nice, huh? It's extremely handy. And let's see if I have time to do one more thing with events. Let's see. So a lot of times JavaScript code is often several lines long, and it's more common to see event attributes calling functions. So the event attribute in the example we just did was on click. All right, so I'll do a file, save as, and I'll change the type to all files. And then I'm going to call this events, I'll call it event function. HTML. All right, so this would be the event is going to still be on click, but I'm going to call it a function this time. Instead of having all the JavaScript code after the equal sign, so I'll still use the element. HTML element would be a button, and the event is still going to be on click. So when I click that button, I want to do something, but instead of having all this code, I'm going to call a function. So surrounding double quotes, I'm going to call, let's see, I'm going to get rid of this information. All right, so surrounded in double quotes, I'm going to call my function display date. And I'm not going to pass it any arguments. All right, so remember, when you call the function, you call it by name, and you pass it, or don't pass it, any arguments. If you don't pass arguments, it's just parentheses, parentheses, empty parentheses. If you do pass arguments, remember, arguments are values that you're passing up to the function. And then we can keep the wording the same. The time is question mark. And then the ending button element, or the ending button tag. Right? Let's see how we removed all the JavaScript code that was inside these parentheses. And all we're doing is calling a function and not passing in any arguments in this example. Now, down below, we're going to need our script tags again. So I have an opening and I have a closing script tag. And then we have to create a function. Remember, it's you start with the keyword function, space, and then in this case, our function name is display date, parentheses, because there's no parameters that we're passing. And then do a space, and then curly bracket, hit enter a couple times, do the closing curly bracket under the F in the word function. And now inside this function, we're going to indent document.get element by ID, parentheses, and then we'll do the ID, which will be demo, divided by double quotes, and parentheses, dot inner capital HTML equals, and what's in the equal? Date. The function, this is another function, we're calling the function date, JavaScript function, parentheses, parentheses, and then the semicolon to end the JavaScript statement. So let's see this, I'll expand it a little bit. All right, so what we have is we have our button, and we have the element is button, and we have the event on click equals, and then surrounded in double quotes, we're calling a function named display date, and we're passing it no arguments. Then the verbiage inside the button is the time is, and then we do an ending element button tag. Then down below, we've added, in between script tags, we've added JavaScript, which created a function named display date, and what's executed when this function is called is the JavaScript document.get the element, the HTML element by ID. And then we name the ID, which is demo, which the element in this case, this example, is a paragraph tag, because this paragraph tag has ID equal demo. And then we're going to display right in our HTML by using inner HTML. We're going to call the JavaScript function date, and that date information will be placed where the ID of demo is located, which is a paragraph tag. So let's try this event handling by calling a function. So I'll do a save. And it's my first time running this file, so I'll do File Explorer. And I have to go to my JavaScript folder. And events function.html is my file name. I'll double click it. And I've got JavaScript events. I'm going to try and get rid of File Explorer. And I will refresh the page. So it does my heading, my H1 tags, say JavaScript events. And then I've got my button that says the time is, question mark. When I click it, it's going to go to my function, my JavaScript function named display date. And it's going to display the date in the paragraph tag that has an ID of demo. So I click it, and boom, it displays the paragraph tag, which is right below the button. If you look in the code, you see the button's defined here, and the paragraph tag is underneath the button. So remember, with events, we can next session we can cover a couple more events because they're really helpful and useful when you're developing with JavaScript. So that wraps up the second session of learning JavaScript, offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. I hope you got something out of tonight's lesson. We learned quite a bit about JavaScript functions, about assigning values to variables, and about handling events such as clicking a button. So I will see you next time, and thanks for joining me tonight.